Haboim. Welcome everyone. We're about to begin Be'ezras Hashem together on Daf Kovches Amud Beis at the very top. The Mishnah states that the Sagan HaKohanim, he declares to the Kohanim to go up on the roof and determine that it's the Zman of Shchitas Korban Tomi Shel Shachar. The Kohen goes up, and indeed when he sees that there's a little bit of light, he declares Bar Kai. The Gemara now brings a brayso to expand on this statement. Tanya Rabbi Shmuel Oimer Borak Bar Koi. Rabbi Shmuel says it means the beginning of the light has shone in the Alos HaShachar. Rabbi Akiva Oimer Alo Bar Koi. Rabbi Akiva says even more light than the previous opinion. Nechuma ben Apkishyoin Oimer Af Bar Koi Bechevron. Even it shines in Chevron. That means each succeeding opinion shows more light. Masya ben Shmuel Hamamuna ala Payosas Oimer Heir Pnei Kol HaMizrach Ache Bechevron. The entire east, the entire horizon in the east is lit up all the way until Chevron. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Oimer Heir Pnei Kol HaMizrach Ad Bechevron V'yatzu Kol Ha'am Ish Ish Melamalachtoi. Not only is it all lit up in the east, and it's lit up, there's light that has shone on Chevron, but also all of the workers have gone out to their malacha. Ask the Gemara on this latter opinion, Ihochi, if there's so much light, Nogach leituva, there's so much light, then you don't need somebody to determine that. That's obvious. Answers the Gemara, Liskor Poyalim Kamrin. What his kavanah was that it's enough light where the employer goes out to determine which employees, which workers he can find to do his daily work, which is an early part of the morning. Aram Rav Safra. Now the Gemara speaks about the afternoon, the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboyim, which is compared to then, that's where we learn out, Tfilas HaMincha, the afternoon prayer. So says the Gemara, Amar Rav Safra, Tzlusei de Avram, the prayer of Avram, referring to his mincha prayer, Mechi Meshachrer Koislei. It was from the time that the wall becomes shadowed, becomes darkened. In other words, it's exactly in the middle of the day. Omar Rav Yosef said, Anon me Avram nikum v'nigmar. We shall learn from Avram Avinu the earliest time to daven mincha. Omar Rav says, yeah, Tana Gomar me Avram. The Tana did learn from Avram. Va'anon lo gamrino mine. We're not going to learn from Avram, as stated in the following brayso, Titania. Ubayom hashmini yimol besar olosoi. It says in regards to bris milah, on the 8th day he shall then mal the orla. Melamed shekol hayoim kosher lemilah. Since it said bayom hashmini, from here we learn out the entire day of the 8th day is kosher to perform the mitzvah of bris milah. Ella shehazrizin magdimin lemitzvahs, but that those who are have alacrity, they do mitzvahs as early as possible. Shneimar, it says vayashkem Avram baboiker vayachavoish v'goimer. Avram got up early in the morning and he saddled his donkey to then do the mitzvah of Hashem in terms of akedas Yitzchok. Elo marove. So Rava said, so what was the reason why I didn't want to learn out from Avram, that Rav Yosef did not want to learn out from Avram? It's because Rav Yosef Hakakashila, he had the following question, the Tanya. It says in the Disna, it says in the Mishnah, Chal Arvei Psochim Lios Be'erev Shabbos. When the 14th of Nisan comes out to be on Erev Shabbos, Nishchat B'Sheish U'Mechza, V'Kor B'Shev Mechza. We're maktim the Korban Tamid, and we then we shoichet rather the Korban Tamid on the 6.5 hours, which is the earliest time, and we bring it up on the 7.5 hours, so we can have more time to then bring the Korban Pesach, which is afterwards, since it's Erev Shabbos, and we want to then roast the meat. That cannot be done on Shabbos, so therefore we want more time in the afternoon. If indeed we're trying to get more time on Erev Shabbos, then we want to make the Korban Tamid Shel Bein Ha'arboim the earliest possible time. So why does it say over here only 6.5 hours? It should say at Chatzois, just as Avram Avinu daven mincha, which we learn out is the same time as the earliest time for Tamid Korban Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arboyim, then if that's so, then we should also bring the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arboyim on Erev Shabbos on the Yud Daled B'Nisan at Chatzos. The Gemara says, "My kusha v'dilma b'koisle de Beis Hamikdash b'sheish umechza meshachrei mishum deloy mechavnei tuva." The Gemara says maybe the reason is that in the Beis Hamikdash was different. They only allowed the Korban Tamid Shel Ben Arboyim to be brought 6.5 hours, is because the walls over there in the Beis Hamikdash were thick on the bottom. They're more wide on the bottom, and they got more narrow as it went up. And therefore, in order for the wall to be meshachrer, so to speak, that there should be only casting a shadow, and there should be going then towards the eastern, towards the Erev, the evening, that is only after a half an hour after Chatzos, 6.5 hours into the day. But of course, Avram Avinu was correct in terms of knowing exactly when that midday was. You can start davening mincha. So again, the Beis Hamikdash, that was an exception. That was different. We couldn't determine exactly. So therefore, we said we can't do it exactly at midday. We'll have to do only a half an hour after Chatzos, because that's when Meshachrei Koisli. Inami, alternatively, you can say Shaini Avraham the Itzdaninus Gedoyla Haisa Beliboy. Avraham Avinu was a master astrologer, and therefore he knew exactly when was midday. We don't know exactly, and therefore we have to then give it a little more time, only after 6.5 hours into the day. Inami, alternatively, you can say Mishum de Zokein v'Yoishe b'Yeshiva Hava. Avraham Avinu was a Zokein, he was a Chacham who was sitting in Yeshiva, and therefore he knew again precisely. He would do it exactly by davening right away in the exact time. Whereas others cannot be as precise as Avram Avinu, and therefore it's only 6.5 hours after the day. Dom Rab Cham Bar Chanino, Mimein Shel Avosenu, Loi Parsha Yeshiv Mehem. The Gemara says from the days of Klal Yisrael, from the days of the forefathers already, they didn't separate themselves from yeshiva, from their academy of learning all of the time. Even when they're in Mitzrayim, they had a yeshiva with them. Shnimar, Leich v'asafto ezikne Yisrael, go and gather the chachamim of Klal Yisrael. When they're in the midbar, there was also yeshiva in Klal Yisrael. Avram Avin, as it says, Shnimar, asva lishivim ish mizikne Yisrael. Again, it says, gather the 70 chachamim of Yisrael. Avram Avinu Zokein v'Yoishe b'Yeshiva haya. He was a chacham who sat in yeshiva. Shneimar ve'Avram Zokein bo bayomim. Yitzchak Avinu Zokein v'Yoishe b'Yeshiva haya. Shneimar, Pasuk says, by Yitzchak v'hi ki Zokein Yitzchak. Yitzchak was wise, indicating that he sat in yeshiva, became wise as a result. Yaakov Avinu Zokein v'Yoishe b'Yeshiva hava. Yaakov Avinu was also considered to be wise and sitting in yeshiva. Shneimar says, "Ve'ene Yisrael kovdo mizoikein." His eyes became darkened. That means he had trouble seeing because of zoikein, because of the chachma that he endowed over the course of his time in yeshiva. Eliezer Eved Avram Zokein v'Yoshev Yeshiva Hava. The servant of Avram Avinu, Eliezer Eved Avram, was also nechshav a chacham, a zokein, who was sitting in yeshiva. Shneimar says, "Vayomer Avram el Avdoi." He said to his servant, "Zokein hamoishel bechol asher loi," referring to him as a zokein. The Gemara now darshans the Eved Avram Eliezer as follows: Omar bi'Elazar she moishel b'taras rabboi. He was moishel. He had shlita. He had dominion over the Torah of his Rebbe, enabling him then teach his Torah, the Torah of Avram Avinu, to others. That's what's in the pasuk who Damasek Eliezer, referring to Eliezer as Damasek from Damascus. The Gemara Darshan Omar bi'Elazar shedoyle umashke mitorasa shel rabbi le'acherim. The word Damasek has these two words of doyle, that's a dalid, umashke. He would dole out, he would draw out, and he would then bring it and give it to others, the Torah of his master Avram. Omar Rav Rav now tells us about Avram Avinu's observance. Ki em Avram Avinu kol haTorah kulo. Avram Avinu, he fulfilled all of the Torah. Shenemar says in the Pasuk, Ekev asher shoma Avram bekoli, because Avram listened to my voice, Hashem says, v'yishmor mishmarti mitzvoisai chukoisai v'sairosoi. So the Gemara brings this pasuk, Shenemar Ekev asher shoma Avram bekoli, because Avram listened to my voice. V'goimer. So listening to that voice means fulfilling all of the desire, the ratzon of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is his mitzvahs. Omar le Rav Shimi bar Chia le Rav ve'ema sheva mitzvahs. Maybe it was only 7 mitzvahs, and that was what's considered to be listening to Hashem's voice. Ha ikanami mila. The Gemara says there was also mila, so it can't be just the sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach. Ask the Gemara, ve'ema sheva mitzvahs mila. Say it's the 7 mitzvahs and mila that he fulfilled. How do you know it's the entire Torah? Omar leim ke mitzvoisai v'sarosai lamali. Why does it say mitzvoisai and tarosai? Omar Rabbi v'item Rav Ashi. Rav Amar Rav Ashi. Ki em Avram Avinu afilu eruvei tavshilin. That he has fulfilled all of the mitzvahs, including the rabbinic ordinances. Eruvei tavshilin. Shneimar says in Torah, Shemazar says tarosai. Achas Torah shebechsav, achas Torah sheba'al peh. Here the reference is not only Torah shebechsav, Torah sheba'al peh, which is Misinai, but here we're talking about even rabbinic ordinances. That's the reference to Torah sheba'al peh over here, the oral tradition that the Chachamim gave over, even that Avram Avinu fulfilled. The Gemara quotes the Mishnah Masya ben Shmuel Oimer. He says that the Kohen declares that the entire East, he says that the whole East, I'll show you the Lashon of the Mishnah, Heyer Pnei Kol HaMizrah, the entire East is lit up. That means the eastern horizon. And then it says, Ad Shebechevroin, and Hu Oimer Hein. The Gemara now explains the Shakla V'Tari, the give and take over here in our Mishnah. Man Omar Hein. Who is the one who says yes? If you're going to say those that went on the roof, who cholim v'hu mefasher. In other words, the Gemara understands that the one who went on the roof, at this point the Gemara understands, he declares that the entire eastern horizon has been lit up. Then he says, he asks, has it arrived to Hebron? To whereby he answers his own questions, yes. So Gemara says, how could that be? If we're talking about him, then he's the one who's cholim v'hu mefasher. He is the one who has a dream, and he then solves the dream. In other words, he'll ask the question and answer his own question. Not mistaber. Elo hachdekoi a'aro. Rather, referring to those who are on the ground. So Gemara says, Menyal yada. If he's on the ground, then how does he know? So Gemara says, "I boys ema hachdekoi a'aro, I boys ema hachdekoi a'igro." There are those who say that you can learn it's the one who is those who are on the ground, or you can say it's referring to the one who is on the roof. As follows: If you want to say that it's those who are on the roof, Omar. This is the following is the give and take. Omar ihu. He says, the one who is on the roof, Heyer Pnei Kol Mizrach. He declares that the entire east is lit up. V'Amar lei, and then they ask him, Hach. They ask him, the Koi A'aro, those who are on the ground, Ad Shebechevron, has it reached also Chevron? V'Amar lei, and the one on the roof says, Ihu, Hein. He says, Hein, yes. That's one way of explaining it. However, v'ibais ema, if you want to say, hach de koya aro, it's referring to the one who is on the ground, as follows. Omar iyu, the one's on the ground, he says, Heyer pnei kol mizrach, has the entire east be lit up. V'amar lei, and the one who's on the roof says, ad shebechevron, until Chevron. Omar lei, hein, and the other one then says, yes. In other words, he says, thank you, basically, yes. He's Makabil that has reached all the way to Chevron.